So, it's a $912 billion budget. On today's episode, we'll be looking at the budget tabled in the Jamaican Parliament on Wednesday, February 9, 2022. We will look at the allocations to various ministries and compare that to the budget of 21-22.
Residential
and the 13,
which comes to us from Isaiah 40.
Hi, I'm DECHAWN, and welcome to my YouTube channel, DECHAWN'S Musings. In this video, I will be looking at the following components of a family budget, household budget, and two components of the Jamaican National Budget, and we'll compare that to the household budget. And lastly, we'll review the 22-23 budget as tabled in Parliament. First, before we get into the first component of looking at a household budget, let's define a few terms. Yes? Let's define a budget. What is a budget? The Business Accounting Volume 1, 12th edition by Frank Wood and Alan Sangster defines a budget as a plan quantified in monetary terms in advance of a defined time period, usually showing planned income and expenditure or expenses, and the capital employed to achieve a given objective. Well, on the Ministry of Finance's website, budget is defined as an estimate of income and expenditure for a set period of time. All right, simply put, a budget is a plan of expenses and income, so money coming in and how one plans to spend that money. That's in the simplest definition of what a budget is. Revenue, we need to define what revenue is. Revenue, Principles of Accounts for Caribbean Examination defines revenue as money coming into the firm or business and due to come in for goods and services supplied by the business. Another text, Carlong Principles of Accounts for CSEC, defines revenue as sales value of goods and services to customers on both cash and credit basis during the accounting period. Now, that's a definition of two textbooks. But layman's term, revenue, it's really money, cash coming in for goods and services that one exchanges, right, for the cash. It may be cash up front or cash to come, right? So you get revenue, the exchange of goods and services done on credit. You know the money is to come in at a future period. What are expenses and our expenditures? Again, text Carlong Principles of Accounts for CSEC defines expenses as costs incurred in the earning of revenues. They are charged against the revenue for a particular period, while Principles of Accounts for a Caribbean Examination defines expenses as money leaving and due to leave the firm for goods and services received. And again, layman's term, what are expenses or expenditure? In the trading of goods, right? You're selling of, if you're a farmer, you sell your produce, right? The yam and dasheen that you planted. Now when you sell that, right? The money that you make from the selling of the produce, the yam, the dasheen, the banana for farmers, the money that you get, that's your revenue. Now the inputs, right? You have to labor, dig your ground, right? There's cost there, so right? Maybe need pay for water, fertilizer. You have to pay somebody to weed up the ground, right? In order to prepare the soil to do the planting of those produce. So the cost that you incurred to get the ground prepared and plant the stuff, those would be regarded as your expenses. That's for your farm. Fiscal year. What's a fiscal year? Because you will tend to hear these terms bandied about during budget presentations, whether fiscal year or budgetary year, budgetary cycle and stuff, right? Fiscal year, otherwise referred to as a financial year or budget cycle, term used interchangeably depending on who you listen to, speaks to a year in which income and expenditure or expenses are used up. So in the case of Jamaica, our fiscal or financial or budgetary year runs from April 1 to March 31. So our financial year or budget cycle will begin in April 1 of this year and will last till the 31st of March 2023. That's the full budget year, financial year. Now, onto components of your household budget. Let's look at a typical family, a typical household. That might not necessarily be your family, but typical family, say a family of 4, mother, father, 2 kids, right? Let's go with that. So the expense family of 4, maybe food bill, water, light, internet or cable, credit for your mobile phone, if it's prepaid phone, right? Transportation cost to go to work. So if mother works, father works, right? And they take transportation, or if they own a vehicle, then there will be gas bill, right? Children need to go to school if they are school going age kids, transportation costs, entertainment bill, right? To go partying and stuff, if you go parties, right? Food for the dog, right? If you have dog and say you take care of animals like that, you're a dog lover like that, so you have a dog or 2 as security in the yard. Armed security services, if you have cash like that, to have an armed security services. Gardening services, so you have somebody that cleans up your yard, cuts your yard, plants flowers, trims the edges and stuff, so that's an expense. School fees for the kids, 2 kids, right? And then there will be savings as well. We hope you save, right? You have savings put away as well, right? Using the items I just mentioned to create a budget for the home, assuming a combined monthly income of both mother and father of $180,000. So we're going to use that as an example. So mother, father works, they both carrying a combined cash into the household of $180,000. So this is what the budget, if you construct a budget or a simple budget, would look like for that family. So the salary of the mother and father together of $180,000, right? You take out savings first. So savings might be 5% of the earnings, right? So you put away $9,000. It's the first thing you take out, right? And then now you're going to account for all the expenses, right? Your food bill of $20,000. Water bill $6,000, light $8,500, internet and cable $5,600, credit $4,000 for the month, transportation costs $15,000, entertainment, right, $7,500, food for the dog $3,000, armed security services, say $25,000 for that, the gardening services, right, the gardener that you pay, right, $40,000 for the month, and school fees for two kids, very young children possibly, $25,000. So in this hypothetical situation, right, the total expenses is $159,600, right, and income after savings $171,000. When you subtract expenses from the income, you're left with $11,400 for the family. That's a simple budget for a family of 4. Now, granted, it's a hypothetical situation, but it's just to explain what a typical budget would look like. So it's basically your income subtracting your expenses and see what's left, right? Similarly, Jamaica's budget, as a national budget, would have expenditures or expenses and income that finance those expenses. So let's look at Jamaica budget compared to the household budget. A few line items we're going to look at. So for income for the budget, Jamaican budget that is tabled by the Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clark, income, taxes and grants. That would be compared to a household that has salaries or wages, right? Money earned by mother and father in the previous example that I spoke of a moment ago. Expenses now, the 3 line items, Ministry of Agriculture, that would say compared to a household budget of food bill. The Ministry of Security, that's another line item. Compared to a household budget, who knows, Ringo or Bruno the dog that we have as security, right? For the household. Government, National Solid Waste, right? So money has to be provided for that entity. So compared to the household budget, that would be a gardener, right? So the man who cut the yard and clean up and all of that stuff. So we could, for ease of comparison, we say that man will be compared to your National Solid Waste, right? So, trying to simplify what the budget process is all about. Now, components of the national budget. What goes into preparing the national budget? What are the components of the national budget? You'll find the following. Income. What are the income sources? Taxes, non-tax revenue or income, capital revenues, grants, loans. Your expenditures are broken down into 2 broad categories really. Recurrent expenditures, right, such as salaries, right? You have other items too, but the large portion of the current expenditure would be salaries to various ministries and departments. And the other category is capital expenditure. Right, so capital expenditure would relate to the fixing of roads, the building of police stations or the repairing of police stations and schools, stuff like that. That would be classified as a capital expenditure. Now, budget is shared between or amongst the following ministries and other arms of government. It's quite a lengthy list, so we'll just pick out a few for the purpose of this presentation. You'll see the list, but I'll just mention a few. The Governor General, House of Parliament, right? The Office of the Prime Minister, these departments, Ministry of Tourism, right? Your Ministry of Finance and Ministry of National Security, and departments that fall under Ministry of National Security, right? So you have all the ministries and the various government departments, their expenditures fall under the large ambit of the national budget. Now, on to the review of the 2022-23 budget. The budget table in Parliament, February 9, shows that the amount due to be spent next financial year, $912.003 billion. So a little over $912 billion is earmarked to be spent for the budget year 22-23 that begins on April 1 of this year. That compared to $893.048 billion spent in 21-22 financial year that is ending, right? So we have a little over a month to go before this financial year ends. Now, how does the two budget compare? The $912 billion compared to the $893 billion works out to be 2.12% increase over the 21-22 budget year. Now, 2.12% increase year over year. It's less than the 4.4 to 6% inflation rate targeted by the central bank. And to be frank now, the inflation rate, which is really your price increases of goods and services, right? The inflation rate somewhere hovering in 9% now, bordering on 10%. And look, the budget as cast by the Minister of Finance is 2.12% increase. So in effect, simple calculation, let's go with the 9% where that our inflation is hovering at. So simple calculations, you're looking at a roughly 7% decline, really, in real terms of expenditures. If you're factoring, you have to factor in the inflation as it is now and what it projects to be. If we listen, you and I listen to what's happening on the international sphere, in addition to what's happening locally, where inflation is going to be here for a couple of months. Now, how does the figures stack up? So here you see my table that lists the various ministries and government departments, what they received in 21-22 and what they will receive in 22-23 budget cycle. Now we'll just pick out a few, won't look at all of them, but here goes. So the first one, that's the Governor General. Governor General is getting $0.407 billion for his office and staff, compared to $0.44 billion in 21-22. That's really a 7% decrease. Let's look at the Prime Minister. It's relatively flat, slight decrease, $13.409 billion compared to $13.464 billion. That in effect is $0.055 billion less than what was allocated to him and his office and departments for the 21-22 year. Ministry of Tourism got a slight increase. It's $11.508 billion that the Ministry of Tourism will be allocated the next financial year, compared to $11.086 billion in 21-22 financial year, which is really a 3.80% increase over 21-22 year. Now, another important ministry, Ministry of National Security. Ministry of National Security will receive $99.396 billion in 22-23 budget cycle, compared to $95.27 billion allocated in 21-22 budget cycle. This represents a 4.33% increase, or put another way, the Ministry of National Security and departments that report to national security combined will receive an additional $4.126 billion for the next budget cycle. Back to the importance of understanding budget, what's happening in our country, and the expenditures, and again, revenues associated with those expenditures. Is remember that budget is simply a plan of how resources will be spent over a given period of time. So it indicates priority. So the budget, looking at the budget face value, just on the face of it without digging into the numbers per se, you can have an appreciation of what the government will be doing for the next financial year or budget year. What are its plans and projections, right? What seems to be important to government at this time and going forward. So it is good to have an understanding and to look over the numbers, not necessarily because it's bulky, the information is bulky to go through, but just summary numbers. When you compare what was spent for the 21-22 year and what will be spent in 22-23, you can have an idea what does the government see as important? What is the government spending on? So, for instance, the Office of Children's Advocate, they will be allocated $0.273 billion for 22-23 budget year, compared to what they receive in 21-22 of $0.232 billion. So they're receiving 17.67% more will be allocated to them. Is that an indication by government that more will be done for children, for the welfare of children in the society? Is that it? The Auditor General will be allocated $1.087 billion in 22-23 budget cycle, compared to $0.962 billion in 21-22. That's an increase of $0.125 billion, or in percentage terms, 12.99% increase in allocation year over year. What does that mean? That may very well mean that the government is giving more impetus to the Auditor General to do good work, to ferret out corruption and stuff like that. So that's the way to look at budget. How much is allocated? Is it an increase over last year, and why? So, if you found this presentation useful and informative, please like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell so you'll know when another video is out. And please feel free to leave a comment on topics that you would love for me to present.
Residential
and 13.
Which comes to us from Isaiah 40.